I want to start by being honest about something before this story begins properly. I was not having a good day when this happened. Not dramatically bad, nobody died, nothing catastrophic, just the specific low-grade exhaustion of a Tuesday that had already asked too much of me before noon. I'd been at work for 4 hours, the store was understaffed by 2 people, and I had been simultaneously managing the customer service desk and covering the electronics section because the person scheduled there had called in sick. I say this because I want you to understand the emotional context. When this woman walked toward me, I was already running on the kind of reserves that make you feel slightly transparent. The version of yourself that's present, but not entirely there. Her name, I found out much later, was Patricia. At the time, she was simply the woman in the red coat. She came to my desk holding a small electronic item, a set of wireless earbuds, still in the box, clearly used based on the state of the packaging. She placed them on the counter in front of me with the specific deliberate energy of someone who has already decided this interaction is going to be a problem. I asked how I could help her. She said, flatly, that she wanted to return them. I told her I'd be happy to process a return and asked for her receipt. She didn't have a receipt. I explained our policy. Without a receipt, I could offer store credit for the current selling price of the item. And that, apparently, was the wrong thing to say. I want to try to describe what happened next accurately, because I think when people talk about these kinds of interactions, they sometimes embellish in ways that make the person seem cartoonishly unreasonable. I don't need to embellish. What actually happened was already cartoonishly unreasonable. She told me the store credit offer was unacceptable and that she wanted a full cash refund. I explained again, as clearly as I could, that without a receipt, I wasn't able to process a cash refund. This wasn't a decision I had made personally, it was store policy. She asked to speak to a manager. I called my manager, a woman named Sandra, who came to the desk within about 3 minutes. Sandra explained the same policy I had just explained, in essentially the same words. That's when Patricia's voice went up. Not in a gradual escalation, in a sudden, immediate jump that made 2 people in the next aisle physically turn around to look. She started talking about how she'd been a loyal customer for years, how the policy was ridiculous, how she'd never been treated this way. And then she started talking about me specifically. Not what I'd done, which had been to correctly explain store policy, but me as a person. She said I had been rude to her, which I had not. She said I had spoken to her condescendingly, which I had not. She said she would be contacting corporate about my behavior, and that she expected me to be disciplined. Sandra kept her composure, restated the policy one more time, offered the store credit again. Patricia declined, loudly, picked up the earbuds, and left. I thought that was the end of it. The kind of thing you talk about with your coworkers for a few minutes, roll your eyes at, then move on from. It happens in retail. It's not pleasant, but it's part of the landscape. About 45 minutes later, Sandra came to find me. Her expression told me something had changed. She said Patricia had called corporate, not the store, corporate headquarters. She had filed a complaint against me by name, alleging unprofessional conduct and deliberate rudeness. She had described the interaction in terms that bore essentially no resemblance to what had actually happened. Sandra told me this wasn't something she could simply dismiss. Corporate complaints triggered a mandatory review process, regardless of her own assessment of what had happened. There would be a written report, potentially a formal warning in my file. I stood there for a moment just taking that in. I had done my job correctly. I had been polite. I had followed policy exactly. And I was now potentially looking at a formal disciplinary note on my record because a woman had wanted a cash refund she wasn't entitled to and had not received one. I told Sandra I understood the process. I asked if there was anything I could submit from my side. She said I could write an account of the interaction from my perspective, which would be included in the review file. I said I would do that. I wrote it that same afternoon. 3 paragraphs. Factual, specific, no emotional language. Just what had been said, in what order, and by whom. I kept a copy. I genuinely didn't think anything dramatic was going to come of it. I expected the review to come back with a note acknowledging the complaint, maybe some vague guidance about customer interactions, and that would be it. Here is what I didn't know while any of this was happening. Patricia, the woman in the red coat, did not just shop at our store. She worked for the company that supplied a significant portion of our store's electronics inventory, the same category she'd come to the customer service desk about. She was a sales representative for that supplier, which meant she had a professional relationship with our company that went considerably beyond being a regular shopper. I found this out in pieces over the following days through Sandra, who had discovered it during the internal review process when she'd looked up whether Patricia had any documented prior interactions with the store. The review had also pulled our security camera footage from the customer service area. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Our store's customer service desk had security cameras. This was not unusual. Most retail customer service areas do. Patricia, when she walked up to my desk and decided to behave the way she did, had done so in full view of cameras that recorded everything. The footage showed exactly what had happened. Me, explaining policy calmly. Sandra arriving, explaining policy calmly. Patricia's voice escalating without provocation. The specific things she had said about my conduct. Things that were demonstrably, visibly not happening on screen. The complaint Patricia had filed with corporate alleged that I had been rude and unprofessional. The footage showed that I had not. But more than that, it showed that her account of the interaction had been significantly, specifically, and documentably inaccurate. And here is where things became considerably more complicated for Patricia than she had anticipated. Our company had a supplier code of conduct. I didn't know this document existed before any of this. Most employees at my level didn't need to think about it. It governed relationships with the businesses we worked with, not day-to-day retail operations. But Sandra knew it existed, and when she confirmed that Patricia was a sales representative for one of our key electronic suppliers, she brought it to the attention of the regional manager, who brought it to the attention of the procurement team. The supplier code of conduct included, among other things, language about professional conduct of supplier representatives in interactions with company staff and facilities. It was not written specifically for situations like this one. It was written for things like improper sales practices and conflicts of interest. But it was written broadly enough that a supplier representative filing a fabricated misconduct complaint against a staff member, documented as fabricated by security footage, fell within its scope. I am telling you this not because I orchestrated any of it. I want to be completely clear. I did not. I wrote 3 paragraphs about what had happened from my perspective and then went back to work. Everything that followed happened at levels of the organization I don't normally interact with. What I'm telling you is what Sandra told me afterward in 2 separate conversations over the following week as the situation developed in a direction none of us had quite expected. The complaint Patricia had filed against me was closed within 4 days of the security footage being reviewed. Formally closed, with a notation in the file that the footage did not support the allegations made. My written account was included in the closure documentation. Sandra told me this with the same composure she'd maintained throughout the whole thing, and I appreciated that about her. No drama, just the facts. The complaint was closed. My record would show only that a complaint had been made and found to be without merit. I thought that was the end of it. Again. It was not. Again. 3 days after my complaint was closed, Sandra called me into her office for a second conversation. She said she wanted to let me know, because she felt it was appropriate given what I'd been through, that the situation with the supplier had developed further. Our company's procurement team had contacted Patricia's employer, the supplier company, and shared the security footage and the findings of the review. They had done this under the terms of the supplier code of conduct, which required suppliers to be notified when a representative's conduct was found to have created a formal incident. Patricia's employer had their own processes for handling situations like this. Sandra didn't know the specific details of what had happened at Patricia's company. That wasn't information our company had access to, and it wasn't really our business. What she did know because the account manager from the supplier had called to apologize to our regional manager, which was itself notable, was that Patricia was no longer employed there. I sat with that for a while after Sandra told me. I'd like to tell you I felt something clean and simple about it, satisfaction maybe, or vindication, the kind of clear emotional response you'd want to feel when someone who tried to get you fired ends up losing their own job instead. What I actually felt was more complicated than that. Not guilt exactly. I hadn't done anything to cause this. The footage had been reviewed by people far above my pay grade, making decisions I had no involvement in. Patricia had made the choices that led to all of it. But complicated still, because somewhere underneath the vindication was the awareness that she had lost her livelihood. That's a real, significant thing, whatever she had done to deserve it. I spent some time with that awareness before I decided what to do with it, which turned out to be nothing, not out of indifference, but because there was genuinely nothing useful for me to do with it. She had made decisions, the system had responded to those decisions, and the outcome was what the outcome was. What I kept coming back to was something specific. Patricia had walked into my workplace and tried to use a formal corporate complaint process as a weapon against me, a person who had done their job correctly and politely, because she hadn't gotten a refund she wasn't entitled to. She had filed a complaint containing things she knew were not true, and she had done it without knowing, or perhaps without caring, that there was footage, that there was a written policy, that there was documentation. She had treated the whole encounter as if consequences only flowed in one direction, toward me. She had been wrong about that. A few weeks later, Sandra mentioned in passing that our company had decided to review its supplier code of conduct language following the incident, not as a response to Patricia specifically, but because the situation had highlighted a gap in how the policy addressed supplier representative conduct in retail environments. The language was going to be updated and clarified. I found this genuinely interesting, not because I had any stake in it, but because it meant that one Tuesday interaction at a customer service desk, started by a woman who wanted a cash refund for used earbuds and didn't have a receipt, had resulted in a change to a policy document that governed an entire supplier relationship framework. The scale of the downstream effects of small bad decisions never stops being remarkable to me. As for me, I went back to work the day after Sandra's second conversation and did my job exactly the way I'd always done it. Politely, correctly, following policy. The difference, I suppose, was that now I knew with some clarity that the system could actually work the way it was supposed to when the facts were on your side and there was footage. I haven't seen Patricia since. I don't expect to. There's nothing I would need to say to her if I did. She screamed at me in public, called my manager, filed a formal complaint containing things she knew were untrue, and tried to use a corporate process as a personal weapon. And the only person who lost a job that day was her. Here is what I think this story is actually about. Patricia made a series of assumptions. She assumed that a retail employee explaining policy was an appropriate target for her frustration. She assumed that her word would carry more weight than mine. She assumed there were no cameras. She assumed that the professional relationship she had through her employer gave her cover rather than exposure. Every single one of those assumptions was wrong. What she didn't account for, and what I think is the quiet lesson underneath all of this, is that systems built around accountability tend to be indifferent to status. The security footage didn't know she was a supplier representative. The code of conduct didn't care that she was a loyal customer. The procurement team didn't weigh her years of sales relationships against the documented evidence in front of them. The system just did what the system does when it works correctly. It followed the facts. She handed it everything it needed to arrive at the outcome it arrived at. I didn't have to do anything except write 3 honest paragraphs and go back to work. That's karma filed. Real entitlement, real documentation, real consequences that nobody had to manufacture. If this story got to you somewhere, and I think it might, because most of us have been on the receiving end of someone who thought consequences only ran one way, you know what to do. Subscribe, hit the bell, there are more of these waiting. And leave me a comment. Has anyone ever tried to use a system against you and had it backfire on them instead? I read every single one. I'll see you Tuesday.